The first record of humanity did not arrive with trumpets or threats. It arrived as an error, a fluctuation in probability matrices, a species whose survival curves refused to flatten. I remember the archivists recalibrating their instruments again and again, convinced the data was corrupted. No intelligent life was meant to emerge from such a world. Their planet was violent beyond reason, its crust restless, its skies unstable, its radiation storms capable of scouring continents bare. Death worlds do not produce philosophers, they produce corpses. And yet, there they were. We laughed at first. I confess this without pride. We labeled them fragile bipeds, noted their short lifespans, their inefficient biology, their tendency toward internal conflict. A species that fought itself endlessly, poisoning its own oceans and skies. How could such creatures ever matter to the galaxy? Their earliest transmissions were crude bursts of sound and light, filled with static and desperation. We archived them as curiosities, background noise in a vast and ancient universe. But the signals did not stop. They multiplied, improved. Within mere centuries, a heartbeat to my kind, their voices grew clearer. Curiosity bled through every transmission. Fear, yes, but also wonder, hope. They asked questions no one was listening to. Is anyone out there? Are we alone? Most species wait for answers before advancing. Humans did not. They advanced anyway. As decades turned into centuries, I was reassigned to long-term observation. That was when unease began to coil in my thorax. Humanity's data did not behave like other civilizations. Where others plateaued, humans surged. Where others retreated from catastrophe, humans adapted. Plagues ravaged them. They endured. War scarred their world. They rebuilt atop the ashes. They lost entire generations and still moved forward, dragging memory and grief with them like sacred burdens. They did not fear suffering the way we did. I studied their conflicts closely, expecting collapse. Instead, I saw something disturbing. Human wars were chaotic, brutal, and inefficient, yet each one forged survivors who learned faster, harder lessons. Their losses did not erase them, they sharpened them. Even their art reflected this madness. Songs of mourning that somehow inspired courage, stories of failure that ended in defiance rather than despair. The council dismissed my concerns. They are young, they said. They are temporary, they insisted.
Every species believes itself exceptional, they reminded me. So I watched in silence as patterns emerged. Civilizations that dismissed humanity in early trade negotiations found themselves economically outpaced within decades. Those who attempted subtle cultural manipulation discovered humans absorbed ideas without losing identity. Pirate clans that preyed on their early colonies vanished, not always through force, but through relentless pursuit. Humanity did not forget slights, nor did they forgive easily. But what unsettled me most was this. When humans lost, they returned stronger. Always. The council chambers grew quieter whenever new reports arrived. We noticed the shift before we acknowledged it. Human vessels began reaching beyond their local stellar neighborhood. Their engines were inefficient, their designs inelegant, but they worked. Improvised solutions stitched together by necessity and stubborn brilliance. They did not wait for perfection. They launched with hope and contingency plans layered atop desperation. That was the moment I stopped laughing. I remember a particular cycle, stars dimmed by interstellar dust, when I reviewed a human archive transmission intercepted by chance. It was not military, it was not scientific, it was art, a simple visual record of their homeworld, scarred and beautiful, set to sound frequencies designed to evoke emotion. It spoke of loss, of perseverance, of standing upright when the universe seemed determined to crush you into dust. I felt something then, a sensation my species has no precise word for, a tightening, a warning. Suffering had not weakened them, it had shaped them. Humans were not rising quickly, they were rising inevitably. Every obstacle refined them, every failure became instruction. They did not evolve toward peace or conquest alone, they evolved toward endurance, toward refusal, toward an almost terrifying resilience that no simulation could fully predict. The stars were quiet that cycle, too quiet. Even the council's endless debates felt muted, as though the galaxy itself was holding its breath.
I submitted my final report with a single recommendation attached, one that would change everything. Monitor closely, avoid provocation, prepare for contact. The response came sooner than expected. An emergency summons echoed through the council chambers, ancient bells resonating with urgency I had never heard before. A single line of data accompanied the call, stark and undeniable.
Humanity has achieved faster than light travel. The error had become a presence, and the galaxy, at last, had noticed. Fear rarely announces itself honestly. In the Grand Convergence Hall, we called it prudence, wisdom, foresight earned through age. The chamber itself was a monument to civilizations that had survived long enough to fear change. Arches grown from living crystal, seats carved from the bones of extinct stars. I had stood there across epochs, watching empires argue themselves into stagnation. Yet never had the air felt so heavy as it did when humanity's name was spoken aloud. The question echoed longer than it should have. Some delegates demanded uplift. They argued that early guidance could soften humanity's sharper instincts, redirect their aggression into cooperation. Others, their voices trembling despite hardened exoskeletons and neural shields, whispered the forbidden word, eradication. A clean solution, they said, before the problem matured. Neither camp understood the danger. The eldest among us, the observers, rose last. Their bodies were ancient things, grown brittle with millennia of survival. They had watched galaxies burn and reassemble. When they spoke, the chamber fell silent. Strength has never destroyed the galaxy, one observer intoned. They projected histories into the air, empires that could not be conquered, undone slowly by foes who refused to die, species who adapted faster than strategies could be written, civilizations erased not by overwhelming force, but by relentless endurance. Humanity's data hovered beside these ghosts, their trajectory unsettlingly familiar. They suffer, the observer continued. The word continue chilled me more than any threat. Thus the pact was proposed. No contact, no alliances, no provocations. Humanity would be quarantined by distance and silence. We would watch, record, prepare, but never engage. Isolation, we believed, would cool their volatility. Without rivals, without enemies, their aggression might turn inward and burn itself out. Time had weakened countless species before. Surely it would do the same to them. The vote passed overwhelmingly. I voted in favor. I tell myself now that I did it to protect the galaxy. But the truth is simpler and far more shameful. I voted because I was afraid of what a species forged by suffering might become if given a reason to stand against us. We named the decision the Pact of Non-Interference. Such noble language.
Such clean syllables for an act rooted in avoidance. We congratulated ourselves, adjourned the session, and returned to our immortal routines. Humanity never knew. For centuries, the Pact held. From the shadows of observation arrays, we watched their ships skirt the edges of our space. Crude hulls reinforced with redundancies rather than elegance. Drives that rattled themselves apart and were rebuilt stronger. They lost vessels, often. They lost people, constantly. And every loss carved lessons into their collective memory. Colonies failed. Entire settlements vanished to famine, radiation, hostile environments they had underestimated. Each time, humanity mourned and then returned, sometimes to reclaim the same worlds, sometimes to build new ones from the wreckage of old dreams. Their growth was not explosive, it was stubborn. Where other civilizations expanded through conquest, humans expanded through cooperation. When they fractured, and they fractured often, they argued, bled, reconciled, and tried again. Their unity was imperfect, fragile, and somehow unbreakable. Even divided, they advanced. I remember a particular cycle when a human exploration fleet unknowingly passed within 3 light years of one of our listening posts. Their sensors were blind to us. Their crews celebrated a minor engine repair like a miracle. I watched them share limited rations with laughter, voices hoarse but determined. They had no idea how close they were to 1,000 unseen eyes judging their worth. And still, we did nothing. But the galaxy does not remain static. Cracks form wherever pressure is applied long enough. The younger species on the council began to ask questions. They had grown alongside humanity's expansion and saw reflections of themselves in the human struggle. Traders whispered rumors in private channels. Humans, they said, honored deals even when it cost them, paid debts with interest, sheltered civilians during border skirmishes they did not start. Refugees from minor conflicts spoke of human medics treating enemies with the same urgency as allies. These stories disturbed me more than any military report. Law, however, remained firm. The pact was absolute. Violation meant sanctions, isolation, even force. We convinced ourselves that consistency equaled morality, that distance equaled safety. Until desperation arrived. It always does. The Kellar Dominion sent its first petition, quietly. A dying species, their stars dimming, their genetic lines unraveling. They requested trade access beyond permitted zones, specifically near human territory. The Council denied them, again and again. Each refusal tightened the spiral. I saw the signs before the alarm sounded. Increased Kellar fleet movements, data packets flagged as anomalous, silence where there should have been routine transmissions. Desperation sharpens ambition, and ambition does not respect pacts made by those who are not starving. The final report crossed my console without ceremony. Unauthorized Kellar vessels had altered course, toward human space. I felt the same tightening in my thorax I had felt centuries ago, when humanity was first labeled in error. Only now, the error was ours. The pact, forged from fear and restraint, was about to be tested by survival, and one species had decided that extinction was a worse crime than betrayal. Collapse rarely announces itself with explosions. More often it arrives quietly, systems failing one by one, hope thinning until ethics feel like a luxury no one can afford. The Kellar Dominion was dying. Their suns were dimming ahead of prediction models, their stellar engineers unable to halt the decay. Cloning vaults that had sustained their population for millennia began to corrupt, producing aberrations or nothing at all. Entire generations vanished before reaching maturity. The Dominion sent petitions to the Council wrapped in formality and pride, but desperation leaked through every line of encoded text. We denied them. Not out of cruelty, we told ourselves, but law. The pact could not bend. Humanity remained off limits. Desperation does not respect law. The first violations were subtle. A Kellar scout vessel crossed into human fringe space under the guise of stellar survey. It harvested mineral samples from an uninhabited moon, erased its signatures, and withdrew. No alarm sounded. The Council chose not to notice. Then came the raids. Covert strikes on isolated human outposts, small enough to avoid attention, precise enough to test response times. Fuel depots emptied. Agricultural modules vanished. And then civilians. Entire habitation rings evacuated in minutes, their inhabitants taken for labor, for study, for leverage the Kellar hoped they would never need to use. They expected retaliation. They expected the human pattern we had warned them about: rage, escalation, war. What they received instead was restraint.
Humanity did not strike back. They transmitted warnings through every open channel. Calm, direct, painfully clear. We see you. Stop. They documented each incursion with meticulous care, preserving sensor data, survivor testimony, and timelines. They appealed not only to the Kellar, but to the galaxy at large, unaware that the galaxy was already listening. I remember one message in particular. A human commander, voice steady despite the tension etched into their posture. "We do not want conflict," they said. "Return what you have taken." The Kellar laughed. Patience to them was weakness. Dialogue was delay. They convinced themselves the Council would never intervene, and that humanity lacked the will to defend its periphery. Each successful raid fed the illusion. Each unopposed withdrawal sharpened their hunger. Then came the final raid. A human settlement designated Havenfall, a name that still tastes bitter in my memory. It was a small colony. Families, researchers, children. No military significance. The Kellar strike was swift and brutal, intended to secure biological resources at any cost. Orbital defenses were overwhelmed. Atmospheric processors sabotaged. The colony died choking beneath its own sky. Children were among the dead. The human response changed overnight. Not with declarations, not with fleets blazing across hyperspace. There was no roar of vengeance, no theatrical display of force. Humanity did not announce war.
They simply began to remove the Kellar-Ganinian from the galaxy. Supply routes failed first. Kellar convoys vanished into the dark, intercepted by ships that struck without insignia and left nothing salvageable behind. Communications followed, relays disabled, encryption cracked and poisoned with false echoes. Entire sectors of Kellar space went silent, not destroyed, but isolated. Allies withdrew next. Trade partners found their contracts mysteriously unprofitable. Pirate clans lost access to safe harbors. Mercenary fleets discovered their payment accounts frozen by cascading economic sabotage. Humanity did not threaten these factions. They presented evidence, data, choices. Stand with the Dominion and share its fate, or step away. Most stepped away. I watched in mounting horror as the Kellar infrastructure unraveled without a single formal battle. Shipyards stalled for lack of components. Defense grids powered down as energy reserves vanished.
Their once proud fleets sat idle, crews starving in orbit around worlds they could no longer sustain. Still, humanity did not invade. Instead, they mourned. Human networks flooded with images of Havenfall, names spoken aloud, faces remembered, vigils held across dozens of systems, music composed not for revenge, but for grief. I observed their rituals closely, expecting sorrow to fracture them. It did the opposite. Grief unified them with terrifying efficiency. Loss became purpose. Every strike humanity made thereafter was precise, restrained, devastatingly intentional. No civilians targeted, no worlds cracked. Only the mechanisms of harm were dismantled, piece by piece. The Kellar leadership pleaded then. They broadcast apologies layered with excuses, desperation thick in every transmission. Humanity listened, and continued. What frightened the Council most was not the effectiveness of the campaign, but its discipline. Humans did not hate blindly. They did not lose themselves to fury. They acted like a species that had learned, long ago, how to carry pain without letting it rule them. I realized then how deeply we had misjudged them. Humanity did not escalate emotionally. They escalated strategically. Every move closed another door for the Dominion, tightening the noose without ever calling it one. The Kellar were not being exterminated. They were being rendered harmless. Cornered species do dangerous things. With their fleets crippled and their future collapsing, the Kellar turned inward. Council spies reported frantic activity within their core systems. Energy spikes, forbidden research vaults opened, ancient weapon schematics pulled from sealed archives. Technologies abandoned long ago for being too destructive, too destabilizing. The Council finally stirred. Emergency sessions convened. Accusations flew, but intervention now would expose the Pact, reveal our silence, our complicity. No one wished to be the first to speak humanity's name aloud in that chamber again. The final Kellar transmission reached my station unencrypted, raw with terror and resolve. Deep within their dying system, a superweapon began to assemble, one designed not to win a war, but to make humanity bleed loudly enough to force surrender. I stared at the projection in silence, watching energy readings climb past safe thresholds. The Kellar believed terror would save them. They had no understanding of what terror did to humans once patience was exhausted. And this time, there would be no restraint. The superweapon fired once. There was no warning that mattered. No heroic last stand transmitted for the archives. One moment, a human defensive flotilla held position near the edge of the Kellar system. Ships damaged but unbroken. Crews exhausted yet vigilant. The next, space itself screamed. Energy, unlike anything in our records, tore through the void, a coherent wound that did not explode so much as erase. Human vessels vanished mid-signal, their hulls unmade faster than matter could register its own destruction. The beam continued onward, striking a nearby moon, ancient, inert, and cracked it open like brittle bone. Fracture lines glowed white-hot before the satellite collapsed into a halo and debris. Then there was silence. No triumphant broadcast from the Kellar, no immediate retaliation from humanity, just absence. The absence that presses against the mind, demanding acknowledgement. I remember holding my breath, though my species does not need to breathe. Across the Council's observation arrays, systems flickered as analysts struggled to comprehend what they had just witnessed. The Kellar had crossed a threshold no one could retreat from. For a single dreadful cycle, humanity said nothing. Many on the Council hoped, foolishly, that this would finally provoke the emotional outburst we had predicted for centuries. A blind charge, a war of annihilation that would justify our fear, absolve our silence. Some even prepared statements condemning human escalation before it occurred. Instead, something unprecedented happened. Every open channel in known space activated simultaneously. Not a patchwork of voices, not competing factions or regional authorities. Humanity spoke as one. The transmission was simple. No music, no visual intimidation. A single human figure stood before a neutral backdrop, eyes shattered with exhaustion rather than fury. When they spoke, their voice was steady enough to terrify me. "We have endured," the human said. "We have warned. We have grieved." No threats followed, no demands. Just a declaration of resolve, broadcast in thousands of languages. Humanity did not ask the galaxy to choose sides. They informed us of what was about to happen. Then, the counterstrike began. It was not a wave. It was not a battle. It was removal. Kalar command centers went dark within minutes. Precision strikes that severed leadership without collateral devastation.
Weapon platforms powering their second firing cycle were disabled mid-charge. Reactors vented safely into space before overload could cascade. Shipyards froze as autonomous systems received corrupted directives that locked them into permanent stasis. I watched the Kalar Dominion unravel in real time. Their most guarded systems penetrated as if humanity had always known the paths in. Later, we would discover they had. Human intelligence networks had mapped the Dominion meticulously during the months of restraint we mistook for hesitation. The most horrifying detail was the efficiency. No worlds burned, no cities shattered, no civilian population centers targeted. Humanity struck only where harm could be enacted again, and nowhere else. Entire fleets were immobilized rather than destroyed, crews left alive, adrift, and powerless. It was annihilation of capability, not existence. Within a single night cycle, the Kalar leadership vanished. Not assassinated publicly, not paraded as trophies, simply gone. Removed from the web of command with surgical finality. Their absence rippled through the Dominion like a severed nerve, leaving confusion, panic, and finally, surrender. Still, humanity did not declare victory. Instead, their next action shattered what remained of our certainty. Human relief ships arrived. They bore no weapons forward-facing. Their holds were filled with medical supplies, environmental stabilizers, and engineering units. Human doctors disembarked onto Kalar worlds whose skies were failing, whose infrastructure had been hollowed out by desperation and poor decisions. Engineers worked alongside stunned Kalar technicians, restoring life support grids and repairing orbital habitats humanity had just disabled days earlier. They treated the wounded without asking who had fired the superweapon. I observed a human medic kneeling beside a Kalar child, one of the last viable genetic lines of their species, hands steady, voice soft, working to preserve a life that had been born into catastrophe. The same species that had slaughtered human children on Havenfall was now receiving mercy without condition. Something inside me fractured. We had avoided humanity out of fear, feared their aggression, feared their capacity for violence, feared what they might become if pushed too far. And yet when pushed beyond what any simulation deemed tolerable, they had chosen restraint so absolute it redefined power itself.
Humanity issued a final statement regarding the Kalar Dominion. "You will not threaten another species again," it said. "Not because you are destroyed, but because you are incapable. You will rebuild under supervision. You will survive." The Dominion was placed under enforced demilitarization, its weapons dismantled, its research vaults sealed. Humanity left behind oversight teams, not conquerors, but wardens, tasked with ensuring the Kalar could never again build instruments of mass harm. Then the human fleets withdrew. No occupation, no monuments, no demands for tribute. Across the council, silence turned poisonous. We had watched everything, documented every stage, debated intervention while lives were erased. We had called our inaction wisdom, and humanity had shown us what wisdom actually cost. I felt shame, not the abstract acknowledgement of error, but the burning, personal realization that our fear had not protected the galaxy, it had endangered it. Council chambers erupted into chaos. Accusations replaced decorum. Younger species demanded explanations. Observers retreated into silence, their ancient confidence finally shaken. For the first time in recorded cycles, the Pact was spoken aloud not as policy, but as a potential crime. Had our isolation of humanity forced this outcome? If we had engaged sooner, guided, cooperated, acknowledged, would Havenfall still exist? Would the Kalar have reached such desperation if they had alternatives beyond predation? These questions clawed at the Council's conscience, and no one had answers they could bear. I reviewed the Pact's founding language again, searching for comfort in its logic. I found none. What once seemed like restraint now read like provocation. Silence, I realized, is not neutral. To a species forged in suffering, silence can feel like abandonment, or worse, permission. Humanity had acted with more moral clarity than the entire Galactic Council combined. And now, they knew we had been watching. That knowledge settled over the chamber like a gathering storm. We could no longer pretend to be distant observers. Our pact, designed to avoid conflict, had become its catalyst. The realization spread slowly, dread pooling behind every set of alien eyes. The final report of the cycle arrived without ceremony, stamped with a designation I had never seen attached to Council doctrine before. Re-evaluation of the Pact of Non-Interference. Urgent. As I closed the file, one thought echoed louder than any alarm.
We had feared what humanity might do if engaged. We should have feared what they would do once they realized we never stood beside them at all. They did not arrive with warships. That, more than anything else, unsettled the Council. Our sensors detected the human delegation hours before they crossed into Council space. 3 vessels, modest in size, unarmed by every conventional metric we possessed. No escort fleets followed in their wake. No hidden armadas lurked beyond sensor range. The ships moved steadily, deliberately, as though daring us to interpret their restraint as weakness one final time. The Grand Convergence Hall had not hosted outsiders in centuries. Its defenses were layered, redundant, ancient. When the human vessels requested permission to dock, the chamber erupted into whispered debate. Some demanded denial, others urged delay. A few, very few, argued we should listen. Permission was granted. The diplomats disembarked without ceremony. Humans, unmistakably so. Gravity-adapted frames, eyes shadowed with exhaustion, movements controlled but never stiff. They carried no visible weapons, no technological marvels meant to intimidate, only data slates and expressions worn thin by long vigilance. They looked tired. That frightened me more than fury ever could. I studied them from my station, every instinct screaming that something was wrong with the narrative we had constructed. These were not conquerors basking in triumph. These were not supplicants seeking approval. They walked like beings who had already made peace with the cost of speaking hard truths. The lead representative stepped forward when acknowledged, a human female, her posture straight despite subtle tremors of fatigue. When she began to speak, the chamber's translation matrices hesitated, as if even our machines sensed the weight of what was coming. "You know who we are," she said. It was not an accusation. It was a statement of fact. Her gaze moved across the assembly, over chitin and light forms and beings whose lifespans spanned millennia. When her eyes met mine, I felt an unexpected urge to look away. "You have always known," she continued, "about our wars, our failures, our losses. You watched us stumble into the stars without guidance or warning." Silence gripped the hall. "You watched us grow," she said, voice tightening just enough to reveal the effort behind its calm. The words landed with more force than any kinetic strike. I felt them ripple through the chamber, striking ancient minds unaccustomed to being named so plainly. This was not a plea. This was an accounting. Humanity did not ask for forgiveness. They asked for honesty. "We are not here to threaten you," the representative said. A pause, deliberate. "We are here because the era of pretending ignorance has ended." A collective intake of breath, gills flaring, membranes tightening, neural fields spiking. The Pact, spoken aloud by the very species it was meant to contain. Centuries of secrecy collapsed in a single sentence. "You monitored us," she went on, "catalogued us, debated us." Her hands curled briefly at her sides before relaxing again. I saw one of the observers shift uncomfortably, their ancient composure finally cracking. "You let us believe we were alone,
the human said, that the universe was silent. The question hung unanswered. No one dared respond. Humanity's representative activated her slate. Images bloomed in the air. Human colonies lost to environmental failure, to piracy, to desperation. Refugee convoys drifting between stars. Memorials carved into asteroids. Children standing beneath alien skies, saluting flags that no longer flew over living worlds. "We survived anyway," she said softly. Her eyes hardened. I realized then that this moment, this confrontation, had been inevitable from the moment humanity first lifted its gaze skyward. We had delayed it, yes. We had tried to control it. But silence does not erase truth. It only sharpens it. A council delegate finally spoke, voice trembling with a mixture of indignation and fear. "Your species has demonstrated volatility," the human interrupted, not raising her voice. The chamber recoiled at the interruption. No species spoke over the council. No species ever had. Humanity did. "We are not asking to be trusted blindly," she continued. Her gaze swept the room again. "You watched us dismantle the Kalar Dominion without genocide. You watched us choose mercy when vengeance would have been easier." The words cut deep because they were true. She took a breath, visibly steadying herself. When she spoke again, her tone shifted, not softer, but heavier. "We will not be isolated again, not by force." A ripple of unease spread through the chamber. Defensive protocols flickered on instinctively, ancient systems responding to perceived threat. But the humans did nothing. They stood, unflinching, allowing our fear to expose itself.
"We are offering you a choice," the representative said. "Ally? Oppose? Or listen? Ally with us," she said, "and help shape a future where no species is driven to desperation by neglect." A pause, longer this time. "Or listen. Truly listen." The hall was so quiet I could hear the resonance of distant stars through the chamber's acoustic fields. I felt something shift inside me. Not fear, not awe, but recognition. Humanity was not demanding dominance. They were demanding accountability, something the Council had not faced in a very long time. The observers conferred in silence, their neural link pulsing faintly. Younger species leaned forward, hope flickering across unfamiliar physiologies. Others withdrew, already calculating contingencies for conflict they could feel approaching. The human delegation waited. No ultimatums, no countdowns, just patience, hard-earned, dangerous patience. At last, the Council's presiding voice echoed through the chamber, strained and uncertain. The human representative inclined her head slightly, respectful, final. "We will be here," she said, "but understand this. Our door is no longer closed. It never was." As the humans turned to leave the chamber, I realized with a chill that the galaxy's balance no longer rested on fleets or weapons or ancient laws. It rested on whether we could meet their gaze and finally answer honestly. Because if we chose silence again, humanity would not wait this time, and the knock we had just heard would be the last polite one. For the first time in recorded history, the Galactic Council chose to see instead of assume. The Pact was suspended, not abolished, but rendered irrelevant by necessity. Observation protocols were rewritten, filters removed, bias dampeners disengaged. We did what we should have done centuries ago. We looked at humanity as they were, not as we feared they might become. What we found unsettled every model we possessed. Their weakness was undeniable. Human physiology remained fragile by galactic standards. Bones that broke, organs that failed, lifespans that ended too quickly. Their worlds were still dangerous, their technologies often inelegant, their political systems chaotic to the point of absurdity. They argued constantly, fractured alliances, disagreed on nearly everything. And yet, they endured. What our previous analyses had labeled instability now revealed itself as adaptability. Human societies bent instead of shattering. When one system failed, another emerged.
When leaders fell, others rose. Not always better, but rarely worse in the same way. Failure, for humans, was not an ending. It was instruction. We studied their networks, social, economic, emotional. Where other species centralized resilience in institutions, humans embedded it in people, families, communities, even strangers. When catastrophe struck, humans did not wait for permission to help each other. They acted first and argued later. Their empathy defied strategic logic. We watched recordings from disaster zones, humans carrying wounded enemies from wreckage, shielding alien refugees with their own bodies, sharing dwindling supplies without certainty of return. They did these things not because they were commanded to, but because they could not imagine doing otherwise. This disturbed many on the council. Empathy, unchecked, is dangerous. It leads to sacrifice, to risk, to irrational decisions that defy survival mathematics. Entire civilizations in our history had collapsed under its weight, choosing moral purity over continuity. Humanity should have followed the same path. They did not. Where empathy might have destroyed them, persistence saved them. Humans learned how to carry compassion without letting it paralyze them. They mourned deeply, but they did not stop. They loved fiercely, but they adapted when love was lost. Grief fueled resolve instead of stagnation. We examined their military doctrines next, bracing ourselves for confirmation of our oldest fears. What we found instead was restraint codified into structure. Human forces trained not only for victory, but for cessation. Their strategies emphasized de-escalation once objectives were achieved. Their command hierarchies allowed refusal of unlawful orders. Their doctrines acknowledged emotional response and built safeguards around it. They planned for the worst parts of themselves. That, perhaps, was their greatest strength. A younger council species summarized the findings in a single, trembling statement. They know they are dangerous. The words echoed through the chamber long after the analysis concluded. We had assumed perfection was the mark of an advanced civilization. Humanity proved otherwise. They were flawed, scarred, inconsistent, and relentlessly forward-moving. Where other species sought equilibrium, humans accepted imbalance as the natural state of existence. They did not seek a perfect future. They sought a survivable one.
As our understanding deepened, something else became clear. Humanity had been shaped by absence, by believing they were alone. Their unity was not born from galactic harmony, but from the certainty that no one else would come to save them. And now, they had discovered we had always been there, watching. The shame that realization brought was considerable. But there was no time to linger in it, because as we finally looked outward with clarity instead of fear, our sensors began to scream. At first, it was dismissed as background noise, cosmic radiation spikes beyond mapped regions, gravitational distortions at the edge of known space. Then entire observation arrays went dark, not destroyed, overwritten, as if something vast had passed through and reality itself had briefly forgotten how to behave. The observers stirred. They had not done so in alarm for thousands of cycles. Ancient records were unsealed, forbidden archives opened. Star maps older than our council were projected into the chamber, revealing patterns deliberately erased from modern memory, regions of space marked not as hostile, but as absent. One observer finally spoke, their voice stripped of ceremonial calm. The Devourers. A chill passed through the assembly. The name was not spoken aloud, but we all knew it. A force older than most civilizations. A presence that did not negotiate, did not conquer, did not assimilate. It consumed. Entire star systems reduced to silence, leaving no debris, no signals, only void where life had once been. The Devourers. We had survived them once by hiding, by sacrificing border species, by retreating inward and pretending vigilance was victory. That strategy had cost billions of lives and nearly ended the council itself. And now, the Devourers were stirring again, closer this time. The chamber erupted into panic. Defense projections failed. Fleet estimates fell short by catastrophic margins. Even united, the council's strength was insufficient. We had grown complacent, static, comfortable behind ancient victories. Humanity had not. A realization cut through me with terrifying clarity. The species we had isolated out of fear was the only one that had evolved under constant existential pressure, the only one accustomed to fighting extinction not as a singular event, but as a recurring condition. They did not freeze when faced with annihilation. They adapted. As emergency alarms echoed through the grand convergence hall, I found myself looking not to the observers, nor to our ancient fleets, but to the empty space where the human delegation had stood. We had finally looked at humanity and seen them clearly. And now the galaxy was about to find out whether we had looked too late. Because the devourers were coming, and for the first time in our long history, we were not sure we could survive them with the species we once chose to ignore.